And welcome everyone to a very special HC Live where we have not one but two guests for you today. We're talking to the two candidates facing each other in the runoff election for Texas's 18th Congressional District, which was the late great Representative Turner's district. We have a little bit of a different format today. So as you can see, we have opinion editor Evan Mintz here with us today. He will be speaking to each candidate one after another, so you can hear from both of them, at roughly the same time. We intentionally did not want to host a debate, but rather an intimate conversation. So, because of that, we won't have time for dedicated time for the audience Q&A we usually have at the end of the live event, but we please encourage you, drop your comments, drop your questions into the chat. We will be reading them. Who knows, Evan may read one of them live during the course of the event. So please, if you can kind of kick off the chat and get it started, please let us know where you're tuning in from. If you're at work in downtown, if you're in the suburbs in Sugarland or Katie, if you're at work in the gallery area like Evan and I are, please let us know and just let us know where you're joining us. We're going to start in one more minute as we allow more people to join. I see Tracy is joining from Midtown. Welcome, Tracy. So I'm gonna read. Delilah and Ito. Okay. So I'm gonna read out a quick bio from each candidate. Up first, of course, we have Christian Menefee. He was raised in Texas' 18th Congressional District. He attended Houston's public schools and with the help of a Pell Grant became the first in his family to graduate college, earning a degree from the University of Texas at San Antonio before going on to law school at WashU. Amanda Edwards is a native Houstonian, a former at-large city council member, attorney, and a founder of a community nonprofit that empowers various groups from seniors to women. She's now running to serve the historic 18th Congressional District. She graduated from Eisenhower High School and Aldine ISD, Emory University, and Harvard Law. And we also have, of course, Evan Mintz. He is the opinion editor, previously served as deputy opinion editor at the Chronicle, where he was a finalist for the Pulitzer in editorial writing. Mintz was also a part of the editorial board team that was a finalist for the Burl Osborne Award for editorial leadership. Also a licensed attorney. He left the Harris County District Attorney's Office in winter 2011 and joined full-time here with us at the Chronicle in 2012. So I didn't realize we have three lawyers here in our event today. So it's bound to be a bit of fun. All right, Evan, it is now 12:02. Why don't you go ahead and take it from here?
Great. Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Christian. Thank you for joining us today. You've been on the campaign trail for a while. You made it into this runoff. So let me ask you, what are you seeing when you go out and talk to voters? How are things different now that it is a one against one primary rather than just sort of a big mass of candidates in the general election?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on, Evan, and thank you to the Houston Chronicle. For starters, it is freezing outside. As like a true old school Houstonian, every time I even think about going outside, it's freezing to me. So that's one way it's different. But no, I've been talking about the same thing since the start of the campaign, how it was a thoughtful, a compassionate, a helpful government that gave me my first shot at the American dream. When I was growing up, there were many nights I would not have eaten were it not for the WIC program. Many days I would have been at school on an empty stomach were it not for free lunch in our public schools. My parents would have never purchased their first home were it not for VA down payment assistance and let them put just $500 down when I was in high school, and that's how we got our first home. I'd have never been the first in my family to go to college without a Pell Grant, and my brother almost certainly would have died from childhood cancer were it not for my parents' military health benefits that fully funded his bone marrow transplant, and now he's been in remission for more than 20 years. At every single step, it was a thoughtful, a helpful, a compassionate government, and that's how you take a family like mine that had sent more people to prison than to college to me being the youngest person and the first African American elected Harris County Attorney. So I decided to run for Congress because I want to restore the middle class in this country, a country that over the past 20 years, 30 years has been heavily focused on making the wealthier more wealthy and not allowing the average Joe and Jane to have their fair shot at the American dream. So the way it's different is I was talking about that back in March. But I think now the other folks who ran on November 4th are starting to catch up with that. We saw out in New York, out in New Jersey, out in Virginia, that campaigns that were based on affordability and addressing kind of the cost issues of rising costs in this country were successful. So that's one piece of it is I'm reinforcing the same message that I was talking about back when this campaign first kicked off. And the second piece of it is you're exactly right. Running against 15 other folks was a lot. You were constantly having to navigate different issues with different candidates and address things that were said by the campaigns, not negatively or anything, but just trying to address the policy positions that they put out. And so being able to kind of hone in and focus and it just be a one versus one thing, I think allows both of the campaigns a better ability to just talk directly to voters about the things that are important to us. So I am grateful that it's just two folks in the election right now, but we still got a lot of work to do, and I look forward to continuing to make my case to voters.
Well, it's you and Amanda Edwards, and we'll be talking to her in about 30 minutes. But how are you reaching out to, say, all the other candidates who didn't make it to this runoff? Are you getting endorsements from any of them? Are you doing outreach to their base of supporters? How are you trying to broaden your coalition to get to that 50% plus one in January?
Well, I've talked to many of the folks who ran in the race, and including at least one of the Republican candidates, to thank them for running. Anytime you put yourself out there, for the entire world to see, and in this business of public service, I think it's a noble thing. So I thanked each of them and had good conversations with all the folks who I talked to. I've been focused on doing everything I can to win the support of the people coming out of that first round. So I've been very excited that coming out of the first round of the election, we announced support from the AFL-CIO out here in the Gulf Coast. This is the big conglomerate of unions. We're talking working folks, whether it be at the ports or metal workers or electrical workers or even teachers. Screened both candidates and decided to support our campaign. And that's important to me because that's what I'm fighting for in this race. There used to be a time in this country where you could work 40 hours a week, you could get the house, the two cars, send your kids off to do better than you did, and retire at a reasonable age with dignity. But now more and more we're seeing folks are working multiple jobs. They don't have money in their savings account. If something happens to their health and they have to pay healthcare fees, they might find themselves underwater for years to come, and they're retiring later. So to me, I got in this race to advocate for working people, to make America's access to the American dream more accessible for every single person out there. So to get the support of labor coming out of that first round was a very, very big deal to me. But we're doing everything we can to build a broad coalition that's, going to want to take a real fight to Washington, D.C. and shake up the status quo up there.
Now, this is an interesting race because that coalition of voters may change. You're running in the 18th district as it's drawn right now. Depending on what the Supreme Court says about Texas redistricting efforts, you may have a different map in November if you win this and then run at it again. Does that have you thinking differently about the issues you're talking about? Do you worry you may have to shift the things that you bring up just from the beginning of the year to the end of the year as voters may change?
No, I don't. So th this new map, which was a Trump pushed map that even a Trump appointed judge called a racist gerrymander, I think it's been an abomination. The fact that the president's policy positions and the bills that he's pushed would be so unpopular, and he would know that they're so unpopular that he would have to go out to red state governors and demand that they redraw the lines just so he can get more seats in Congress and not lose his majority is embarrassing. It happened out here in Texas. It's in the courts right now. So the map is before the United States Supreme Court. They may rule and decide to restore the map. Either way, doesn't matter if it's the old map or the gerrymandered map. I'm running in the 18th Congressional District. I have been in these communities. I have done the work on the ground. And what I've found, Evan, is it really doesn't matter which side of town I'm on. When I'm talking to folks about the issues that are impacting like the average person throughout our communities, they're the same, right? It's how are we going to deal with rising childcare costs? How am I going to afford to pay rent? Why is it that I had a healthcare issue and now I'm having to choose between utility bills and paying for a life-saving treatment? So I suspect that the issues are going to be the same. And I think one of my strengths is I have the same message regardless of who I'm talking to. You can put me in a room with CEOs or put me, at a corner store. I'm going to be talking about the same stuff because this is why I decided to go into service in DC in the first place. So I think the message is going to be the same. I'm hopeful that the Supreme Court blocks those racist gerrymandered maps. But if they don't, then I'll just be making the same case to folks out in the south side of town.
One of the issues you haven't brought up is immigration. And that's something that I think during the general election was not necessarily on everybody's radar. But since then, it is something that has come up at city council, at city hall. We've seen it really get national attention as federal agents have been doing immigration raids and enforcement here in Houston. How do you think Congress should be addressing this issue? Is there a bill that you want to pass? How could you as an individual help move that forward?
I think Congress needs to take the issue head on. Right now, we're seeing across the country, because of abuses by the president, mass ICE agents who are showing up at schools, at places of worship, even at Home Depot parking lots, trying to go after folks who are just doing what they can to make ends meet and take care of their family. I've personally experienced this in my own family. I have a very close family member who's undocumented, who came to this country as a child, who has done every single thing ever asked of them, went to high school, did well, went to college, did well, and was recently the victim of a road rage incident. And this person wouldn't go to the police or to the hospital because they were nervous that in Trump's America, they would potentially be deported. That's not a immigration system that is benefiting anyone. It is an overreach, and it is pushing the types of things that we don't want to see in our community. Yeah, I have fought time after time as Harris County Attorney to protect immigrant communities. At the county, we devised an immigration legal services fund that allows folks who are going through the process of trying to obtain their citizenship or potentially dealing with deportation when there wasn't a crime committed, allows them access to counsel, which is incredibly important. And we've worked on a number of other initiatives. When I go to Congress, I plan to try to address this issue head on. Look, I believe very deeply that folks who have been in this country and who have not gotten into trouble and who contribute to our economy should have a path to citizenship. So that means long-term residents, that means dreamers. We have to fully fund our asylum processes. You have folks right now who are waiting for years to get some sort of ruling as to whether they're entitled to asylum in this country. So the courts are just inundated with cases and backlog, which means that people aren't getting their day in court and like their answer as to whether they should be able to be here legally. So I'm going to fight every single day to take this issue head on. And I think the main problem I've seen out of DC is both sides run away from this issue. They run as fast as they can because there's no easy solution. But I think, my track record as county attorney has shown that I don't run away from tough problems. I like to, I don't run away from the house that's on fire, I run into it. So I'm going to advocate every day to get a bill passed that talks to those issues that I just mentioned to you.
It often seems like that immigration specifically is one of those issues where because people can't bridge that gap, they can't come together, it gets caught up in partisan divisiveness. Is this a place where, you'd be willing to say, I'm going to take half a loaf, I'll take 80% of the loaf, we can just get something to the president's desk and get it signed?
100%. I think there are going to be areas where we can have a conversation and try to compromise, right? If you're in our country and you've committed violent crimes and that's been adjudicated, you got to go, right? We should be deporting folks who are in that bucket. I think it's just about being honest in our conversations and not treating conversations around lawmaking as an opportunity to go viral on social media. So many folks in Congress right now are just playing to their primary because they're in wildly partisan gerrymandered districts, and they treat every single conversation like an opportunity to go viral on Twitter so that they can then send out emails and raise more money. It drives the country further apart, but it elevates them and their public persona. That's not why I'm going to Congress. I am someone who is focused on solutions, on getting stuff done. That's who I've been as county attorney. That's exactly who I'll be in Congress. I never ran for office to go to galas, to be famous, to hang out and be seen, to go to luncheons. I ran for office to get stuff done for people who grew up in the same circumstances that I grew up in, for people who I know have the ability to be anything they want to be a doctor, a lawyer, to be an electrician and provide for their family, but just haven't had fair access to that. So that's what I'm going to be focused on in Congress, and that means having conversations even when they're difficult.
Okay, keeping that conversation grounded in Congress, sometimes it feels like a reason why you have members just spending all the time on social media is that there's just not a whole lot of lawmaking going on in Congress right now. A lot of stuff is done through big omnibus bills that are written by leadership. They get plopped on people's desks and then they say you got to vote up or down on it and you're going to vote with your party. As a member of Congress, if you get elected, what is it that you can actually hope to accomplish as that just one individual freshman member? Like, what's your strategy? What's your vision about moving that policy needle?
Yeah, I think it's about going in with a clear plan about how you're going to impact and just being a leader. For the past 4 years, I've been the county attorney, and anybody who has done work anywhere near the county will tell you that I'm not someone who just looks at the law and sees what my duties are, and I try to do the bare minimum. I've done plenty of things to make life better for people in Harris County that weren't in the job title. We fought as hard as we could and ended up getting past a living wage policy for county government. So folks who work in Harris County now all make at least $20 an hour with a sliding scale to increase over time. And we did that because of the rising costs that we were seeing and because so many people weren't able to make ends meet. when a landfill was trying to extend more deeply into a historically black and brown community on the northwest side of town, I teamed up with a Republican commissioner to block it. And that is, not something that's in the definition of what you do when you're a county attorney. I think, and this is one of the things that the late Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee was good at. You have to be prepared to just go and try to find a solution to get stuff done. Your job as a member of Congress is to be a solutions finder.
Mhm.
So I plan to go up there and be creative in my ideas. Right now, President Trump is stepping outside of the bounds of the Constitution, of the laws, of the norms, routinely. We talked about the mass ICE agents. Right now, there's extrajudicial killings going on in our waters. Time after time, the president is figuring out ways to subvert the Constitution in ways that are very obviously illegal. And what you're saying on the left is there's not a cohesive strategy, a legal strategy for standing up to the president. I just so happen to be well positioned for that because as the county attorney, I've taken the Trump administration to court and beat them. And so we've seen folks in leadership in the Democratic Party, both on the Senate side and on the House side, try to coordinate a legal strategy. But the courts are one of the few places where folks have been successful in reining the president in. So I plan to be active in that. But we also have an oversight committee, right? And we have a judiciary committee, and their job is to investigate and hold the president accountable. And that's directly in the lineage of the 18th Congressional District. In the early 1970s, when the Watergate scandal was being investigated, it was the gentle lady from the 18th Congressional District, the late great Barbara Jordan, who gave one of the most fantastic speeches you'll ever hear in politics that ultimately led to the toppling of the Nixon presidency. I think a lot of times we don't talk a lot about the committee work that goes on in Congress. And so I plan to be impactful in that way. But the third and most
Mhm.
important way is Congress, in my opinion, is like a lot of other politics in that it's about interpersonal relationships. Being able to work with folks who just don't see the world the same way that you do. My history before I came into politics was working at a large law firm, right? And there was one point in a law firm of thousands of people, I was the only black litigation associate at the entire firm. I routinely worked with people who didn't look like me, who didn't see the world the same way that I did, and we got a lot done, and we had just fine relationships. I've been that way as county attorney. When large cigarette corporations came and tried to get our kids hooked on vaping, I teamed up with the Attorney General of the state of Texas, who I'm not even going to name right now, and we went after those companies and got tens of millions of dollars back for Texans to address those issues. So I think the third way that I can be impactful is going in prepared to like work with folks. And I know that, there are many folks out there who think that there are a majority of folks in the MAGA wing of the Republican Party in elected office who cannot be negotiated with, who you cannot work with. And I think there are going to be a lot of times where you got to hold the line, right? It's a red line, you cannot cross it. But to the extent that you're going to help me bring resources back to Houston, I don't care if you're blue, red, black, white, orange. I'll work with you to get that done.
What are some of those issues where for you it really is a red line? What are the things where you say, I can't compromise on this, doesn't matter if it's part of a big deal, I have to vote no on
Well, guns is one of them.
it?
You've seen right here in the state of Texas that Governor Abbott, despite the fact that we have had multiple mass shootings, including at an elementary school and at a grocery store, and innocent people are being killed. Governor Abbott and the leadership and the Texas legislature on the Republican side have done every single thing they can to make it easier to get access to guns in this country. I support a ban on assault weapons. I support closing the gun show loophole. I support making sure that we're getting mental health funding for folks who have been victims of shootings so that they don't have to live with that trauma untreated for the rest of their life. So I
Mhm.
suspect that's going to be a red line where I'm not willing to cave on. Another is voting rights. Right now, you're seeing a very coordinated strategy. Ever since the case that came out in the mid 2010s, the Shelby County case that ended pre-clearance, so basically gave southern states the ability to start changing their voting practices without getting permission from the federal government. You've seen states across the South pass laws designed to make it more difficult to vote. Here in the state of
Mhm.
Texas, they made it harder to vote by mail. I will not bend on voting rights. I'm going to do every single thing I can to expand access to the ballot box so that every person who is eligible to vote can register and cast their vote as easy as possible. There's a number of other red lines I'm going to have, but then there's also places where I know I can work together, right? Like
Mhm.
infrastructure. We saw just on the flood mitigation side that it was a Republican congressman out here who helped get dollars to come down to expand our bayous and for stormwater detention and retention. In an area like Houston, where we've seen 500-year storm after storm, where people have been victims of flooding, of high winds, they've lost their property, their dignity, and in some instances, even their life. it's incredibly important that we work together on that issue. And that's not a red or blue issue. And in fact, I've seen where Republican congressmen have been helpful in getting dollars back for that. So I plan to work across the aisle to the extent I can on that. But at the end of the day, Evan, this is Trump's White House and it's Trump's Congress as well. And I think we've seen a Republican Party that is unwilling to be reasonable in many instances. So the same way that I vigorously fought against him as county attorney, I plan to do so in Congress as well.
So let's cut the bounds of reality for a second. There's a lot of restrictions given politics today about what can happen in Congress and how you work within that. But let's imagine that you have a magic wand and you can make the House and the Senate pass the bill. You can make President Trump sign it. What would you make them do?
Medicare for all. It's
Yeah.
easy for me. So when I was growing up, I remember very vividly September 11, 2001. I was in the eighth grade, was sent home like so many students across the country. And when I got home, it was silent. There was nobody there. There was vomit in the middle of the floor. And eventually I got a call from my parents that my brother had relapsed with cancer. So my brother battled leukemia as a child. And we were in hospital after hospital. I spent a lot of my childhood in hospitals because anybody who's dealt with something like that will tell you that it's both the person who deals with the childhood cancer, but it's also the entire family. And what I saw firsthand was families standing in the hallway crying because they're not going to be able to afford a treatment. It was kids passing away because their family couldn't afford great treatment. And meanwhile, because my parents served in the military, we had both Medicare and TRICARE insurance, which meant that my brother had chemo funded, had radiation funded, and ultimately had a bone marrow transplant that saved his life. And that was right here at MD Anderson Cancer Center. I don't believe that a single person in this country should have to choose between putting food on the table and getting life-saving treatment. There are countries out there that have virtually no bankruptcies because of medical debt. And meanwhile, the United States has had hundreds of thousands of bankruptcies directly related to medical debt. I believe that we should have a healthcare system that is focused on patient outcomes and not on profits for corporations. So I would get Medicare for all passed. You've seen single payer systems in multiple countries throughout the world. If they're smart enough to get it done, we can get it done as well. And I believe that healthcare is a human right that every single person should be entitled to. I'm not talking about access to healthcare. I'm not talking about affordability of healthcare. I'm talking about guaranteed healthcare.
All right, thank you. So we have time for a couple questions that we've gotten here from the audience from the Q&A. And we've got a couple folks all asking kind of the same question, which is about your role right now as county attorney. They want to know, why are you still in this seat rather than resigning and letting the voters pick a replacement this November or this past November, and instead leave it up to Commissioner's Court to appoint your replacement if you win?
The law's the law, and I'm following the law. So I've already resigned. In the state of Texas, the moment that you announce, you automatically resign from office. So I have resigned from office. The Texas Constitution requires that I keep doing the job until I'm replaced by Commissioner's Court. But the race will be on the ballot for next March and next November. So as soon as Commissioner's Court votes to replace me, I'm out. But I've already resigned. I automatically resigned when I announced my campaign for Congress. But right now, I am legally required to continue doing the job. And I think a number of years ago, there was an elected official who announced that they were resigning and then went and took another job. And in fact, it was ultimately determined that they had to come back to work because the Constitution requires that you keep doing the job until you're replaced. So whenever I'm replaced, I'm moving on. But I have resigned and I'm no longer the elected county attorney.
It sounds like a complicated legal issue they're all caught up in.
Yeah.
So another question that we got is asking you to name some specific policies that you could push to help make family life more affordable. We talked about universal health care, talking about Medicare for all, but kind of thinking, I imagine, just a little bit smaller, where the places where you can do those incremental changes within Congress, presuming that Democrats take back the House and Senate to move stuff through.
Well, one is housing assistance. So I grew up in and out of apartments and other military housing because my parents couldn't afford to buy a home. And we see for so many folks, it is impossible for them to be able to put 20% up to pay for a home. So my family was the beneficiary of Veteran Affairs down payment assistance, right? Because they served in the U.S. military. And I saw firsthand how that took us from military housing to living into the first home that we had ever owned. And I think I was 16 or 17 years old at the time. Former President Kamala Harris was pushing a $25,000 down payment assistance for folks. I would definitely support down payment assistance. I think it's a way to put money directly into the hands of people who need it, to have them spend it on something that is going to set them up potentially to have generational wealth. Another is a tax credit for our caregivers. I didn't know this until recently, but we have more than 3 million people in the state of Texas who are caregivers. So that's caring for a family member or a friend who is either an adult who is going through something or is incapacitated, or a minor who's dealing with a disability. These are folks that, in many instances, you cannot claim as a dependent on your taxes. Right now, we give so many tax breaks to the wealthy. There are billionaires in this country who, in the last 10 years, have paid less in taxes than many of the people on this Zoom right now. If we can figure out ways to put money in their pocket, then I think we should be supporting our caregivers as well. I want to expand tax credits like the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit, putting dollars directly into people's pockets as well. I think it's about what are your budgetary priorities, right? And for me, when we dole out tax dollars, it's about putting those dollars into the hands of working class folks so that they can build themselves up and create a better future for their families.
Hmm. Another question we have is what bipartisan steps will you take to strengthen public education and support HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities?
Well, for one, I support increasing substantially the amount of funding that we pour into HBCUs in this country right now. We've already seen steps by the Trump administration to talk about cutting that funding. We've seen targeting in the state of Texas, folks going after Texas Southern University just recently, in a way where the lieutenant governor almost seems gleeful when he's doing it, and that's just adding insult to injury because we have seen the takeover of the largest school district in the state of Texas, and we all know that the goal there is to flip us to a fully charter system that leaves kids who are stuck in public school to rot in an environment that does not teach them or prepare them for the future. So a few things. One, we have to protect against the elimination of the Department of Education. President Trump put over that agency a former professional wrestler, Linda McMahon, to run the DOE, but they've been explicit that their goal is to strip the DOE, to eliminate it. And I take big issue with that. I would have never been the first in my family to go to college were it not for a Pell Grant. And I have so many friends who would have never in a million years found themselves in college if they didn't have access to funding from something like a Pell Grant. I want to increase funding to our Title I schools, and all throughout the 18th Congressional District, we have Title I schools that need that funding in order to survive. But in addition, wraparound services, because I know that there are a bunch of kids out there like me who stayed after school for a good amount of time because that was the best and safest place to be. On the bipartisan front, I think you've seen folks on the Republican side who support expanding Pell Grants, who support allowing the use of Pell Grants for workforce development programs, which I am also very passionate about because we tell every single kid in this college in this country that you got two paths. You can go to college or you're probably going to be unsuccessful. And I just don't believe that that should be the case. So I want to expand Pell Grants for workforce development programs. And you've heard interest on the Republican side to do that. That said, the path to a robust public education here in the state of Texas is Democrats have got to flip the state of Texas. Texas is controlled by Republicans in every single branch of government at the statewide level, and you have a supermajority in one body of the legislature and a majority in the other. And they have taken an axe to public school funding and done every single thing they can to have our public schools run out of Austin instead of run by the local school boards. So that to me is where the fight must really take place, and it's why I've spent the better part of the last decade trying to flip the state of Texas, trying to get Democrats elected so we can have a government that's more representative of the people who live here.
And is that a fight you're going to keep doing if you get elected to Congress? How can you from DC help increase that Democratic turnout, try to flip the state blue?
Well, the first thing you got to do is you got to campaign in the general election. A lot of these districts are severely gerrymandered. So you see people will campaign in the primaries and then they go missing for the general election, which, to them individually doesn't matter that much because their seat is so heavily gerrymandered that they're going to win. But the problem is if you don't close the margins in some of these districts, then it's going to be impossible to flip the state of Texas. So activating the folks in my district to make sure that they're participating in the general election, but also helping other folks get elected. I've spent the past 10 years doing everything I can to get smart and thoughtful leaders elected across the state of Texas. From supporting Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett when she was a state representative running for Congress, to Dexter McCoy, who's become a fantastic leader out of Fort Bend County. It's about understanding that this is a team sport. And it's not about getting Democrats elected just for the sake of them being in office. It's about helping elect people who are going to change the trajectory of our state. And as Governor Abbott and other folks tear our public education system down, go after our local governments and try to make it harder to vote, I understand that this is a team sport. And in order for us to fight back against that stuff, we're going to need people in statewide offices and to flip the state legislature.
Oh, thank you for that. Now, I think we're just up on time. Colleen, or do we still have more time for another question? Oh, we got to wrap this up. Well, Christian, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for talking with us. And we'll see you out there on the campaign trail. And now we have Amanda Edwards coming up, the other candidate in the runoff for Texas 18th Congressional District.
Awesome. Thank y'all. Bye.
Amanda, hello.
Hello, how are you?
Doing well. Thank you for joining us. I think Colleen is going to introduce you.
Okay.
No, I think you can go ahead and start. We read her bio at the very start, at the jump.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Well, Amanda, let me ask you the same question that I asked Christian when we kicked it off. You were running in a big group of 15 candidates in that general. Now you are 1-to-1. How has that changed for you? What are you seeing out there on the campaign trail?
Since the moment that I got started, I have been laser focused on the 800,000 residents of this 18th Congressional District who have gone without their voice, been without their vote, been without someone who could advocate on their behalf for federal funding. And so that focus continues and we elevate their voices and concerns. I've done that since I actually started this journey back in 2023 when I got into the race on Juneteenth of 2023, the first time in the congressional race, and then of course have continued being consistent, engaged, and participating alongside these residents. What I'm hearing them say is that they want change. They want their voices heard. They want their vote back, but they also want to see transformation in this community. And so this gives us the opportunity to, of course, focus on the issues that matter most to the constituents. And I think those happen to be things that are meat and potatoes issues, as I call them: healthcare access, economic opportunity, housing, infrastructure, and education.
So what are you doing to reach out to, say, the candidates who didn't make it to this runoff? How are you doing outreach to, say, their base of supporters? How are you trying to broaden your group of supporters to get to that 50% plus one on election day?
Yes, we're really excited to be neck and neck walking into this runoff election. We believe that we have the most potential for growth. A lot of my base was being shared in that race with a larger field, and now, of course, can be more consolidated. We have reached out to other candidates who ran in the race, and of course, also have secured support from multiple candidates who now are endorsing my candidacy for Congress. So some of those things have been made public, some have not. But at this point in time,
we're really
excited
news right now?
There's no breaking news, Evan.
Okay.
None today. But we have reached out because, of course, everybody had ideas. Everybody had supporters who, were invested in the outcome of this District 18 election. So I happen to understand and appreciate that this is not about one single candidate. It's about what can we collectively achieve to get the results that this community is looking for and deserve. And that also entails talking to those who were at one point opponents, and of course now could be working alongside you.
It's going to be an interesting race because, like we said before, the district is changing. It's been redistricted through a mid-decade gerrymandering process. It's working its way through the courts. You may find yourself elected to Congress by one set of voters and then suddenly having to represent a different set of voters. Does this have you thinking differently about the issues that you might have to take on in Congress?
From the moment that Governor Abbott conspired with President Trump to engage in this mid-decade redistricting, which resulted in the racially gerrymandered maps, as was deemed as such by the court, the lower court, that is. When that, of course, occurred, we knew very early on that this was also part of a plan in addition to disenfranchise and quiet and mute the voices of people who need to be elevated and heard. This was also an attempt to sow seeds of confusion. So from the very moment that that announcement was made, that DOJ letter had the 18th Congressional District listed in it, we knew that there was an intention here also to sow seeds of confusion, of course, which could result in people getting overwhelmed and then disengaging. And of course, we know if we don't vote, then more of the same will occur. And so our campaign has been vigilant via social media, personal appearances, whatever we could do to meet people where they are, to educate them about the state of this redistricting, because it is in flux. You know, as we know, just one day on a Tuesday, we got the ruling from a court, and by that Friday evening, we had another ruling by the Supreme Court, at least a temporary one, but still very confusing to the voters. So our job is to, as leaders, make sure that we are effectively communicating to people about these boundaries, about the status of this circumstance. We have a filing deadline of December the 8th coming up upon us. That's something that is an important information for people to have, the difference between the special election and the midterm election, for that matter, and a city council election, because as you know, these things that are going to be back to back to back. Literally, we are in the midst of a city council runoff race, which is not typically separated from other races, but in this instance, it's solo, and that's happening as we speak. We've got to educate people that I'm not on the ballot for that, but we still want you to go and vote for that.
It's very confusing for voters right now.
Yeah. 100%. And then some kind of way explain to them that on January 31st, our election will be held, and not just held on the 31st, we'll also have early voting, the 21st through the 27th, which is a shorter time than what people are used to. So educating people that that second week you're used to, you won't have this go round. And so there's a lot of education in terms of what people's expectations are and what will be happening in this election cycle. I've been asked, what are you concerned about? And then, of course, the midterm will follow potentially with different maps. I've been asked, what about voter fatigue? Are you concerned about that? And you know, I think in this case, it's a very unusual set of circumstances. When you do the math and you count the time from when Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee got sick and passed away, Congressman Turner passing away, the delay in the special election, the delay in the runoff election, we're talking about a year and a half where people haven't had their voice, their vote, their ability to advocate for themselves. So while it is tiring to, you know, have this number of elections, what is more tiring is to be disenfranchised. What is more, terrible in this circumstance is for our community to be silenced, especially with the long legacy of voices that we have once been privy to, having had Barbara Jordan and Mickey Leland and Craig Washington, Sheila Jackson Lee, and Sylvester Turner once served as the voices for this community to amplify the concerns of this community. So it's a very ironic set of facts and circumstances that we face. And so, yes, I think there are a lot of elections coming up, but I think people understand the importance, the significance, the urgency of why they've got to turn out and vote. They want their voice back.
I mean, I imagine there's a lot of voters in the district who are champing at the bit to go and have their voices be heard in this election because they haven't been heard for so long.
That's right.
What are some of the things you're hearing from voters that say, if I were just to pick a Democratic voter somewhere across the country, they'd probably talk about healthcare, affordability, things like that. But what are the issues that are unique to the 18th that if you are elected, you'll be able to bring up to DC that right now just aren't being heard?
Absolutely. You know, I have to, keep talking about this issue because we have lost lives, billions of dollars in damage when it comes to disaster recovery and infrastructure investment. When you don't have your voting member in place, you're not able to send down and have advocacy for federal funding to come down to your district. That is something that in this year and a half, we have missed out on, having that advocacy, having those dollars optimized. We don't just have 800,000 residents, we also have assets like downtown infrastructure. You have also assets like the University of Houston, Texas Southern. You have Intercontinental Airport. I mean, these are major, massive things that don't have their federal advocate for funding. And so we've got to get in there on day one with somebody who knows how to bring home the bacon, as they say. And so I don't know, in my prior life, prior to getting into public service, I was a public finance attorney. So I did that professionally, bringing public dollars to public projects, which is a significant portion of what you do in Congress. So I will be ready on day one, not only having done that work as a public finance attorney, but also as someone who has done that work as a city council member, bringing down substantial sums of resources. I know where there are gaps and where we need to retool, how funding even works with more direct allocations to our region. And those are you need somebody who's going to be ready on day one with the right experience. And I bring that to the table. So infrastructure, while it's not the most glamorous and it's not the sexiest topic there is, it is the crucial issue that is now being underfunded. And of course, we've got to be prepared and put people in a position where they're safer and better off rather than worse off just because cameras have gone away. We tend to be in the business of paying attention to issues like that when there's the headline news in front of us. Somebody's floating around on a boat and having to be rescued. We have to be doing this work well outside of the time frame when someone's floating on a boat. We've got to be in the business, as I say, you can't stop it from raining, but you can be prepared to catch it when it does. So I'm deeply passionate about infrastructure investment. I'm deeply passionate about overhauling disaster recovery in our nation. So while it is very unique to Houston to have several 500-year flood events in a row, as we have, and I was a city council member when that was ongoing, in addition to that, it's not just Houston that is being impacted by the things that President Trump is proposing, like underfunding FEMA, making states and localities responsible for their own recovery. States like California, states like Florida, states like Louisiana, in addition to Texas, are also uniquely positioned in an unfortunate way when it comes to insurance access. And so we're starting to see that become a national issue in different facets of different types of storms and having an inability to get insurance. When we can't have some of the major economic engines of our nation just simply be held to a different standard in this way. We've got to make sure that we can thrive as well. And so I do see there is opportunity not just to work with the Texas delegation on infrastructure investment and disaster recovery, but also working across state boundaries to have the coalitions needed and a bipartisan level of coalition building that will be necessary for disaster recovery reform and insurance and addressing issues of the insurance crisis that is looming.
Now, that's really interesting, focusing on insurance like that, because I think a lot of folks, when they're looking at disasters, it's how do we rebuild the homes? How do we build the flood infrastructure so this doesn't happen in the first place? But more and more, I'm hearing from people say that they just can't afford insurance on their homes in Texas, in Florida, in California. And it's great to hear that there's a focus on this. What is it that you think Congress can do to ensure that people have the insurance they need to protect their homes, protect their investments, while not bankrupting themselves, just paying the bills?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it happen. We had a federal intervention when it came to National Flood Insurance Program. That's a federal intervention on specifically flood insurance. And of course, we may need to look at some avenues that could be made available when it comes to the fires in California, when it comes to wind damage and other damage that you're seeing be reported in these huge storms that continue to be on a recurring basis. These storms are not new. None of this is a surprise. This happens every year. And the way that disaster recovery works in our nation does not work efficiently enough. It doesn't have enough of an emphasis on impact. I think there's so much emphasis on avoiding fraud and abuse and not enough emphasis on getting the funds to where they need to go so they're used in a way in which they actually have its full impact. And that's what we need to be focused on. For example, a lot of the times, by the time you get the policy as to whether or not your street is going to get bought out, you've already sold it or spent your life savings to somebody, spent your life savings on it or insurance if you have it, or you sold it to somebody who knocked on your door and said, we want to buy your home, because you didn't have the policy set of policies that help to drive decision making at the right time. And so, again, there's a lot of disconnects, a lot of also uneven practices when we talk about disaster recovery. I have been on the ground rolling up my sleeves with low-income senior citizens who were being left behind time and time again. I had to get a New York Times piece written about one of them because she couldn't get a FEMA check. And by the end of the week, all of a sudden it came. We shouldn't have to have that be disaster recovery. That's not how it's supposed to work. We should have a system that's predictable, easier to navigate. Another suggestion that I have too, in a policy that I would like to propose, is funding for something called housing solution centers. What is that? Well, what we have found is that people, when something disaster strikes, they're looking for answers. They're looking for solutions. And what they often face are a series of closed doors and silos, what you're not eligible for, what you can't qualify for, why you got denied, as opposed to someone or a group helping you to navigate your way towards solutions. And so my proposal would be to fund housing solution centers in which the feds, the state, the localities all collaborate alongside our nonprofit partners to help people navigate toward housing solutions rather than a bunch of siloed no's. And I think if we really take that approach, you will see disaster recovery begin to truly work for people of all sorts and backgrounds. And that's what I think we ought to be striving to do.
Now, you mentioned the challenge of just having to deal with policy that is reactive to what's on the screen. And the reality is that right now, one of the stories making headlines is immigration enforcement in the United States. Here in Houston, we are seeing people protesting at City Hall about immigration enforcement. We are having questions about federal agents arresting people who maybe do not have criminal records, trying to deport them. We're seeing state guards and National Guards put in American cities, and there's a lot of reaction to that. At the same time, there are people out there who are demanding stronger enforcement of immigration law and want to feel like that the laws are being followed. What is it that you think Congress should be doing, and how will you take on immigration as an issue if elected?
I think we have got to get out of the business of playing politics with this issue and playing with people's lives. It is largely destructive just to make it a political chip in the way that it has been. And we got to get serious about governance and good policy making. That is what people, we like to talk about people going in to fight, but you also have to come out and deliver, and you've got to be good at governance. And I think we've got to focus on how do we create comprehensive immigration reform that really allows us to fix a very broken system. How so? How is it broken? Well, of course you want your border to be secure. I don't think anybody argues about that. But, we don't need to be engaging in inhumane practices. We don't need to be victimizing people who are citizens of this country simply because of what they look like and who they're affiliated with. We've got to use our limited resources that we have to make smarter, sound decisions and, of course, policy. Why are these lines, this backlog that we have and the quotas? These are decades long. We have not been focused on figuring out how it is that we can go about creating systems and the quotas that actually make sense at this point in time in a 2025 environment. We've got to get to that point. We shouldn't have 25-year lines that people are then trying to look to work around. That's one example. Another example, with those that have been here contributing to our community, Houston is home to, I think, where 142 languages are spoken here. It's amazing. That's a community that's built upon the strength of immigration. And that's a strength. I continue to say it's a strength. And so I believe we've got to find pathways to citizenship. DACA should not be questionable depending on who is the president and whether or not that's going to be intact. We've got to now get to the space and place where we're comfortable about finding pathways to citizenship for the people who have been contributing to this country.
Mhm.
Our Texas economy, we see right now when the Trump administration took hold and put all this extra emphasis on enforcement and victimizing people who were not, had any violent criminal past and just going after people because they were of Latino descent. That is wrong. That is wrong. And we have to be able to stand up for people, even if you yourself are not being targeted. We have to be able to stand up for people and call a spade a spade. Right is right and wrong is wrong. And
Mhm.
we've got to be serious about policy. Again, this is all political. Let me give some red meat to the base, they say, and get people riled up about these issues. And the truth of the matter is, our economy is far more complex than that. Our humanitarian considerations ought to be evaluated and a part of this equation. And ultimately, our community is stronger as a result of
Mhm.
making smarter, more humanitarian policies that work for everyone. So I think we've got to get to the drawing board and look for people who are going to be serious about governance as opposed to simply trying to get a soundbite on the nightly cable news.
Do you see anyone up there right now? If you walk into Congress on day one and think, this is the person I want to talk to, clearly they're serious about legislating, and I want to go try to work with them.
Oh, there's several people I think in general, but on this
Mhm.
issue, I think we've got to get to it. I think there's got
Mhm.
to be a call to action of a different variety that is what is going on today.
Mhm.
So I do see people, of course, making strides in different arenas, but when it comes to this push for comprehensive immigration reform, we've got to stop moving the goalposts. You've seen that happen
Mhm.
in the past where, okay, this was a, conservative idea, and then if it's considered now Democrats can agree to it, then no, we don't want that deal
Yeah.
because we want to be able to run on the following issues. That's the stuff that I'm talking about when you start politicizing progress. Like you should
Mhm.
just have progress. Sometimes one side is going to get the credit and sometimes the other side will get the credit. But at the end of the day, we need a country that functions and the dysfunction we're experiencing. I mean, we literally just came off of the longest government shutdown our country has ever seen on the basis and premise that we decided to make healthcare unaffordable for people. That's
Mhm.
wrong. And again, the promise that was made isn't being kept in terms of that negotiation. And so again, we've got to get into the business of what is going to allow our community. Our goal, my goal as a candidate, my goal as the next congresswoman for this district is to create a community where every single person in it, no matter what their background, no matter where they live, has the opportunity to thrive. Not just get by day to day, but to actually truly thrive. That means you have to have policies in place that help to support your ability to be educated, be housed, healthcare. These are the things that are part of that equation that we need to make sure are
Mhm.
there. But at the same time, and keep us safe.
Well, let me ask, let's put aside the considerations of how Congress operates, and let's just kind of shoot for the horizon. You have that policy magic wand. You can make the House and the Senate write a bill. You can make President Trump sign it. What does that law look like to you?
I'm going to go ahead and talk about something that's very timely, and we got
Mhm.
to fix this Affordable Care Act. This
Mhm.
is, very, very important. And I don't mean it just in terms of the subsidies. That's that is where we have gridlocked on a policy decision at this moment because of the time sensitive nature of it. We're seeing premiums go up in Texas by 35% now that this enrollment is opened up. And so we know that that is a very sensitive subject. But in addition to that, we've got to make it work for people in a broader way. When I was growing up, my dad was sick with something called multiple myeloma. He got diagnosed with that when I was 10 years old, and he died from it when I was a teenager. And I'll never forget asking my father, what would happen if the insurance company, what if they said no to the life-saving treatments that I knew that my father needed at the time? And I'll never forget his answers. He would just look at me and say, well, we just have to figure something else out. And I knew then, just like I know right now, that that actually was the wrong answer. And the right answer should have been that we have systems in place that save lives and contemplate the real lives that are hanging in the balance of the decisions we make or choose not to make. So when it comes to providing healthcare access, making sure that it's truly affordable and that people are actually fully insured. It does you no
Hmm.
good to have access to a product if it doesn't give you what you need when it's time to use it. And so we're also needing to really get back to the drawing board on how to provide adequate and appropriate coverage for people. So I think was one of those issues that we got it got passed initially. It was such a hot topic. It was such a hot potato. There were lawsuits left and right everywhere, up and down. You couldn't turn a corner without a new lawsuit being filed for a minute when it came to healthcare and the Affordable Care Act. But we have now gotten past those days. And I think it's time that we focus again on saving lives and putting people in positions where they can thrive. If you don't have your health, you can't have all of the other things that we think about when we think about the American dream and it's in your community and having economic stability and all the things that you need in order to thrive. And so for me, making it affordable, making it accessible, making it have adequate coverage, those are the focal points, in addition to expansion in various ways where there are other gaps. Health equity is a passion of mine. We live in a state and we live in a county where we're home to the world's largest medical center, yet we
Hmm.
are also home to the highest number of Black maternal deaths in the country. That's outrageous. And so when I think of people who have taken the lead, and you ask me about people in Congress who are getting to work, people like Congresswoman Lauren Underwood, who got to work with the Omnibus bill, for example. We need more investment in figuring out ways in which we can reduce these disparities because people shouldn't be dying because of health disparities in this way,
Hmm.
and particularly here in this nation. And so that's a big passion of mine. That's part of healthcare. Also, with regard to women's reproductive rights, right? We've got a true crisis on our hands. Texas is the most dangerous space and dangerous place in the country to be pregnant. And because
Hmm.
our state has decided that their thoughts, their views are more important than you and your doctors and your own family's reproductive choices. And so we know that we have no business for the governor, the state, or anybody to be in your physician's conversations with you. That is something that is between a woman and her doctor.
How can you take on that topic from Congress? What do the
So,
bills look
so
like
one
that can
example
help
of
protect
that is
Texas?
codifying Roe v. Wade. That's
Hmm.
one example. Second example, this bounty hunting that we have now legalized here in Texas, we should have a federal anti-stalking piece of legislation that
Hmm.
could say basically what we have allowed here in Texas is not legal on a federal level. And that's
Hmm.
another way to be creative with policy to combat the environment that we've created here, which is resulting in women dying at alarming rates. And those are some of the examples of healthcare when I think about women's rights and women's reproductive freedoms, health equity, but also just general expansion of coverage. Also, mental health is part of that as well. Again, we need to be back in the prevention business. We shouldn't just be looking at spending, all of this money in end of life care without
Hmm.
making the requisite investment in preventative care and preventative access. And so we've gotten away from that with some of the dangerous rhetoric of the Trump administration and turning our backs on some of the strong policies that we were trying to push forward. I'll close also on the healthcare bit with this. Prescription drug costs is a big issue. We finally
Hmm.
saw under the Biden administration, President Biden getting those prescription drug costs negotiated down within the framework of Medicare. Of course, you've heard Trump wanting to go back on that progress. And then, of course, in addition, it shouldn't just be limited to seniors. Prescription drugs should be affordable to everybody. So
Hmm.
it's not, Medicare is one example of a way that you can get those prices negotiated, but it should be negotiated so that it's affordable to everybody. I've talked to people before the negotiated prescription drug costs happen as part of the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. I talked to some folks before that. We're talking about rationing the drugs. They take the prescription in the morning, but can't afford to take the second pill at night, so they take something over the counter. We shouldn't have our senior citizens who are on fixed incomes living like that and having to make decisions like that. We've got to be conscious of our actions and or the failures of our actions. And I will just say, having grown up with my father being sick like that, it really opened my eyes to the fact that there are people whose lives hang in a balance every single day of the decisions we make or choose not to create. Or to make, and the systems we create or choose not to create. And so that's the lens through which I will be leading this district as the next Congresswoman who will be very passionate about healthcare access and economic opportunity for everyone.
We've got time for about one more question. I'm going to take one Q&A from the audience, which is what specific federal policies will you champion to help advance educational opportunity both across the country and the 18th, with a real focus on public schools and HBCUs and college affordability?
Great question. I'm deeply passionate about education access. I am a proud graduate of Eisenhower High School. I was a Mighty Eagle out of the Aldine Public School District. And so it is personal to me that we are adequately funding our schools. Our Texas schools in particular are facing such a great risk and threat of not being able to adequately support the needs of our students because our state has decided to engage in this voucher system and underfund our public schools. In addition, our Project 2025 outlined for President Trump how he ought to go about the business of dismantling the Department of Education. And so we're seeing Title I funding go away. We're seeing Pell Grants go away. We're seeing resources that were for lower income families and those with special needs also go away. And so as a result of that, you are seeing our students in particular getting pinched on both sides. They're not just getting pinched on the state side, they're getting pinched on the federal side. And that means they're not having access to adequate quality education in the ways that we once could experience because we had funding available to our public schools. And so we have got to now find some alternative ways. It's not going to be that I get to write a bill and recreate the Department of Education in a way, but you can find clever mechanisms for starting to find alternative measures to support the things that were being taken out. So it's going to have a different name, it'll have a different brand, have a different approach, but that's what you do in difficult to navigate environments. You find your ways, you have to be clever to navigate through those ways. And so that's one example. When it comes to HBCU funding, grants, I know in our country right now, DEI and all of these things are bad words. They're not bad words to me. We have got to support what is known as equity. And part of that is evening the playing field by having access to quality education at higher ed levels. But at the very same time, what we also need to do is make sure that our students can afford education. What I paid to go to school when I was a student is far different than what these students are being paid and the debt they're being saddled with. They have the full mortgage that they walk out of school that they owe, and they haven't even bought a house yet. And so we've got to get in the space and place where we're doing common sense things, making sure that pricing and costs are not just skyrocketing without any ability to reel some of that in. So affordability for higher education is one of my priorities. I will be focused on that. Both on the public and private school levels. I think it's unaffordable across the board. And we used to be the space where everyone wanted to come to gain access to education. And we need to champion that by also making sure that it's accessible and affordable, not just to people who are coming from abroad, but also people who are right here in our backyard ought to be able to access that education as well. I'm someone who knows what it means to have gone from Eisenhower High School in the Aldine Public School District and gone and had the opportunity to go to Harvard Law School. And, having access to education of a variety of sources, the ways of those doors became open to me. And of course, was now, have been able to use that education in a variety of ways to serve this community. So I believe that we cannot weaponize education. And when I see the wars that our president is engaging in when it comes to educational research, by stopping research funding to our educational institutions, that is also horrific because you're talking about stopping cures to diseases. You're talking about, stopping medical research when you do that. So we have got to get out of the business of allowing education to be a space and place that has been politicized like so many other spaces and really understand the utility and value as a whole to our entire community if we have institutions of higher learning that are well funded, where research can continue, and of course, where they're affordable as well.
Well, we've run out of time. I'm sure we could talk all day, but Amanda Edwards, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Miss Ms. Edwards, thank you, Mr. Menefee. Early voting on the runoff election begins January 21st, and I think the actual date is January 31st. But thank you again for spending your lunch hour with us. Have a good day.